A whirlwind of events just happened in US-occupied Korea. First of all, President Yoon declared martial law in order to, quote-unquote, protect liberal democracy from anti-state actors and pro-North Korean sympathizers. Apparently, according to the rules-based international order, the only way to protect their version of democracy is through fascism. So what exactly happened? Well, it turns out that President Yoon is actually under threat of impeachment from the main opposition party, the DP, due to corruption, as well as his stance towards North Korea that is barreling the country towards all-out war. As soon as President Yoon declared martial law, he deployed troops to surround the parliament, preventing any politicians from entering. But with the help of citizens that have gathered in order to contest the martial law, politicians were able to enter the parliament in order to hold a vote to put down the martial law. Even then, South Korean troops broke windows and stormed the parliament in order to disrupt the vote. But eventually, 190 politicians voted in favor of ending the martial law and declaring it unconstitutional. So for now, only time will tell on what happens next, whether Yoon eventually gets impeached or the status quo is maintained.
Total chaos in South Korea as the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has declared a martial law and state of military emergency in the country. The President of South Korea seen here is a big ally of the United States, and he has accused the opposition of South Korea of taking control of South Korean parliament and, more importantly, sympathizing with North Korea. It should be noted that the current president of South Korea has been deeply unpopular for the last few months and was facing a lot of calls for him and his wife to be investigated over corruption charges. It seems like the president of South Korea is taking tips right out of the playbook of Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu. Prior to October 7th, the Netanyahu was facing a lot of similar corruption charges. We of course know what happened next. Netanyahu used October 7th in order to go and attack their neighbors, and being a wartime president actually became more popular within the Israeli population. It seems like the South Korean president is also trying to take a similar route where he wants to escalate with North Korea. This will really favor the US, as the US wants South Korea to be tougher on North Korea. There are reports that North Korean soldiers are fighting in Russia against Ukraine.
President Yoon just announced martial law in Korea. The parliament has been closed. The army is now blocking entrance into parliament. This is the first declaration of martial law since the Sixth Republic's emergence in 1988. The first in 43 years since the military dictatorship of Chun Doo-hwan announced martial law after their coup. I listened to the whole announcement by Yoon, and here's a summary. So Yoon's reasoning is that the current parliament has continuously impeached various people from his government, the latest of which is their attempt to impeach the defense minister. That this has paralyzed the administration, and that the current parliament is also blocking various budgets, including military and police budgets, when he is trying to make a safer and a more secure society. He is saying that the parliament is holding the country's budget hostage for political pressure on Yoon. And he says that this is an act of subversion by the parliament, that they need to root out the 반국가 종북 세력, the anti-government and pro-North Korean elements from the parliament who are trying to demolish the country. So there's that usual conservative line of trying to legitimize anything through connecting it to North Korea and anti-communist sentiments. So essentially, he's calling for martial law because the parliament is against him and his party. Now, a lot of this comes from the way the Korean parliament has been since 2020. So 더불어민주당, the New Politics Alliance for Democracy, has held more than 50% of the seats in the parliament since 2020. And this was while Moon Jae-in, whose party is also the New Politics Alliance, was president. But then Yoon got elected in 2022. So his party is 국민의힘, the People Power Party. So what happened was that since 2022, the ruling party under the presidency became 국민의힘, but then the opposition held majority in parliament. Then, through the 2024 parliamentary election, the opposition continued to hold more seats, with 170 seats out of 300. And what I'm suspecting is that they're using this martial law declaration to pressure the opposition and also possibly prosecute members of the opposition. Which is why I think this whole thing is unfounded. He's essentially saying that he doesn't agree with what the elected officials are doing, so he's going to declare martial law to root out elected officials? Now, here's the thing. Under the Korean constitution, if the majority of members of parliament demand that the president draw back martial law, the president must accept. And currently, not only the opposition, which has a majority anyway, is rejecting this, his own party is also looking at this negatively. So if and when the parliament demands that martial law be rolled back, will President Yoon accept? Because if he doesn't accept, that's when things will get ugly. And that's when I predict that Koreans will come out to the streets again. They've done it before, they've done it to even worse presidents, and they'll do it again.
I don't think anybody understands what just happened in South Korea, but we will. In a matter of 6 hours, South Korean citizens stared down the barrel of a military dictatorship and shut it down. It was only 40 years ago that South Korea had a military dictatorship. Their citizens, they've seen how bad it is, and they're not going to let it happen again. Americans have lost that fight. Not only did President Yoon back down and rescind his declaration of martial law, but as a result, the Korean Federation of Trade Unions, which includes 1 million workers, including the entire Hyundai assembly line, announced an indefinite general strike until President Yoon resigns. Adjusting for population, that would be like if 7 million Americans went on strike to demand the resignation of Donald Trump. The overwhelming response was warranted. South Korean officials announced that they reviewed closed-circuit footage, discovered that in the process of declaring martial law, President Yoon attempted to have the opposition party leader, the ruling party leader, and the Speaker of the National Assembly arrested. They tried to arrest political leaders before they could hold a vote to overturn martial law. President Yoon attempted to overthrow the South Korean government. South Korean citizens have seen this movie before and they're not going to watch a rerun. So instead of allowing President Yoon to provide Donald Trump with a case study on how to overthrow a modern democratic government, South Korean citizens provided us with a blueprint on how to respond if Donald Trump tries to do the same.
넘어가.
We have some huge breaking news right now coming out of South Korea, where according to the Washington Post bureau chief in South Korea, the South Korean military is saying that martial law will remain in effect until the South Korean president decides to lift it, even though the parliament has just voted unanimously to lift and block the martial law decree. Now, the South Korean military and special forces have begun to withdraw from the parliament building, but the military chief, according to the Washington Post, is saying that martial law will remain in effect until President Yoon says otherwise. And it is unclear whether or not the president will comply with the parliament. People in the streets are actively chanting and cheering on the parliament, and even cheering on a possibility of having Yoon arrested for declaring martial law. There is major chaos and unrest in South Korea right now, and it's only likely to continue now. Comment below your thoughts, spread the word, and follow along to stay up to date on all the news that you need to know about.
Some of y'all are confused as to why I called South Korea US-occupied Korea. So I'll break it down for y'all on this video. First of all, the US military has 73 bases in South Korea, and that includes over 28,000 military personnel. Secondly, the South Korean government has zero jurisdiction over these military bases, including their military personnel. So that means a US soldier can commit a crime in South Korea, but will be tried under US courts and under US law. Lastly, and most importantly, during times of conflict and times of war, it is a US military general that is in charge of all military in South Korea. This includes all of South Korea's military, as well as all the US military personnel stationed in South Korea. This ultimately means that South Korea needs the US empire's permission in order to declare both war and martial law. This occupation is the US empire's two-state solution that has been in place since the Korean War and is ultimately the main reason that the Korean peninsula is still divided today.
People just refuse to be realistic. They don't like to be realistic.